welcome to a brand new episode here on Glengarry, the Contractor. Yes, so we're off to field 38 where we've got some ploughing to do, and then we've got field 14 which is a bit of grass mowing to do as well. So whether we'll get both done in this episode or not, I don't know, but we are certainly going to give it a good try. But field 38 is a half decent field, to be fair. I'm pretty certain it's the one where in the last episode we did the sugar beet from. So yeah, it's it's a decent sized field, but hopefully we should make a job. Yeah, it's the sugar beet field, but hopefully we should make a job of it. So right, we'll start from this end and then work our way back. Yeah, you can see a little bit of sugar beet that we've missed there. Yeah, as I say, we'll start from this end and we will work our way back. So I hope you're all doing well. Hope you're all having a good week, and that life is treating you pretty good at the moment. I have to admit, mustn't grumble. Life's not going too bad. So yeah, all is good. And there goes the train. But yeah, it's been a crazy start to the week. So I've started off this week having to take my little boy to school. Funnily enough, we've managed to find him. Oh, hang on a minute. I'm missing some. We've managed to find him a school where he's doing holiday club because he has got one or two sort of conditions. I'm missing it again. Can you believe it? We'll get to the end and then we'll go back. Yeah, because he has got one or two issues. He's got ADHD and autism and stuff like that. He gets very bored and frustrated very quickly. And traditionally the summer holidays are really trying time, sort of for him, for him and for her, well, mainly his mum, but when I have him as well, he's quite restless, and obviously me with the conditions that I've got, I can't run him around and tire him out, and it becomes quite sort of frustrating for him, and as I say, sort of frustrating for myself as well. And anyway, so we managed to find him a school where he can go for, it's only for a week, and it's this week, and fingers crossed, hopefully he should get quite a bit out of it, in terms of interacting and getting all of the stimuli that he needs with people that are trained to kind of to deal with someone with those things. So it's a pretty hectic week because, as I say, I'm having to pick him up and then sort of drive him to school, then come home, try and do some recording, try and do some uploading, and then go back to school, pick him up again, take him home, and it's been as I say, it's been a bit of a busy old week. So yeah, but it's all good, and so hopefully he enjoys it. Whenever you ask him, he always says, "Can't remember," and that's pretty much all you get all of the time. So what have you been doing today? Can't remember. What are you doing now? Can't remember. So that's the challenges that you can have with him, but he's a good lad, and as I say, I sort of do feel sorry for him a little bit because, as I say, he has some challenges in life that I just can't comprehend and just don't, sort of understand and what have you. So yeah, but yeah, otherwise it's not been, as I say, too bad a week. It's been pretty good. Harvest around us is ongoing and in full swing, and as I say, I've been sort of out and about, sort of having a look and, sort of trying to get rides on the machinery where I can, which not always possible, but sometimes it does work. Wow, this tractor's struggling with this plough in this field. This was the tractor that I thought would cope. No, the tractor I should have put it on. I should have put it on the case. That's a lot more horsepower than this. I should have put it on that tractor. Just didn't think. I just put it straight on the back of the 7810. But that's what I should have done. We had a 7810 on the first farm that I worked. Well, we had one on the second farm, actually, to be fair. But on the first farm that I worked on, it was the main tractor. It was the one that did the main jobs on the farm. On the second farm that I worked, the 7810, it was a main carting tractor, and it was pretty much all that tractor did was just pull an 18-ton Bailey. So it in my opinion, it was underused. But when you consider our main tractors were, Challengers and John Deere crawlers and and stuff like that, it's understandable why it kind of sort of got left out a bit. But so it used to pull an 18-ton Bailey, grain harvest, potato harvest, carrot harvest, onion harvest. So from sort of mid to late July onwards, it was a very busy tractor, right up until sort of Christmas, really, because we would try and get all of the sugar beet harvested if we could before we broke up for Christmas, and we used to have roughly about 6 weeks off, so we used to break up for Christmas sort of the last 2 weeks or so of December, and then so mid-December, and then sort of go back end of January, beginning of February, depending on sort of, because we were a paid salary. If we'd sort of earned too much money, obviously we would get a bit longer off, but so you sort of try to keep that in reserve so that you could go back in February. It wasn't always a thing, if the farm was busy, or if the weather turned and the weather was really nice, and it was sort of dry and what have you, and we had some wheat drilling to do or whatever, then we would go in. But as soon as the work sort of dried up again, or there wasn't much about, we would just have the time off. But so it didn't happen every year. I think 2 years I can remember that I worked there, that I was off from sort of mid-December to the first Monday in February. And usually as well, with me being the main ploughman on the farm, while the others may well be off, if there was ploughing to be done, I'd be at work, especially if it was frosty, because obviously the colder and sort of frostier it was, the more I could work, so I tended to do a lot of shifts overnight, while the weather was sort of really harsh and sort of minus. I remember one night I was working out, for those that know the area, but for those of you that don't, you'll have sort of no idea. But I was working between Sutton Bridge and Wisbeach. I was right out in the open, and I started work at probably about 9 o'clock in the evening. The frost had started. I would say it started freezing at about 7 o'clock. It was quite a harsh winter. It was the winter 2000 I can't remember if it was 11 or 12, but it was a really harsh winter in terms of the fact that we had really severe frosts. We don't genuinely get a lot of snow here in the UK, Yorkshire and places like that with the hills and stuff, Derbyshire, Cumbria, Cumbria and places like that. You know, they probably, and Scotland definitely, you know, probably do get a lot of snow. But where I am, in the heart of the Fens, you know, sort of on the Norfolk border, we don't get an awful lot of snow here. You know, it tends to be more frosty and, you know, sort of that way inclined, really. And yeah, one night I was working, so I'd started work at about 7 in the evening, and was sort of working away. And then about 1 o'clock in the morning, I had a look at my tractor temperature gauge for outside, and the because we had work phones, so it wasn't sort of my personal phone, it was a works phone. Well, on there we had all the apps that the farm needed us to have, you know, and what have you. And I sort of pressed on there, and it read true. It was minus 12 degrees, and I mean, I was lovely and toasty in my tractor cab, but I had to get out a couple of times that night. Bugger, was it cold. I mean, I like the cold, so I didn't mind. You know, it doesn't bother me. I love the cold, because the colder it is, you know, the more my heart function goes up and the more my body functions. So the colder the better. You know, hence the reason why at, you know, sort of this moment in time in sort of my real life, my life now, I am contemplating moving to Scotland, and moving to the north of Scotland as well. So, you know, sort of up in towards sort of like the Aberdeenshire area, and, you know, sort of places like that where, you know, in the winter time I can imagine it's bitterly cold. You know, so it is something that I am sort of considering, and the heart hospital where I go in London, St Bart's, they've kind of sort of said, you know, maybe consider moving to a cold country, you know, or you know, and seeing if that really helps you, because as I say, you know, we don't get a lot of snow in the winter where I live, but boy, is it hot in the summer. Like, you know, it's the I mean, it is amongst sort of like, you know, real yellow belly locals. It is, you know, it is known as the Sahara of England, because it's so dry here, and, you know, we're usually very desperate for, you know, rain and waterfall and, you know, sort of stuff like that. And yeah, it's bad. But that night, as I say, it was minus 12, and I had to get out a couple of times, and you know, I think the first time I had to get out was one of my skimmers had caught a stone or caught something on the ground, and it had twisted it, facing it backwards, so it was facing like sort of the opposite way, and I had to get out to try and do it. Well, I was trying to use the spanner to undo the nut to turn it back, so I didn't have the strength to pull it back, and I was trying, and like literally it was that cold that my hands was sticking to the metal of the spanner, and also, or freezing to the metal of the spanner, and also freezing to the skimmer plate that I was holding on to, trying to get leverage to turn the bolt. It was very, very, very cold. But yeah, I enjoyed those nights. You know, those nights was okay. But as I say, at the moment here, you know, harvest is well underway. And last night I was riding around probably about 11 o'clock in the evening, trying to cool down and what have you, and sort of got the windows of the car wide open, the roof wide open, because obviously I couldn't get sunburn, because being ginger and fair skinned, honestly, you know, you stay indoors, you know, as deep into the house as you can get, away from any windows where any possible sunlight could get you, because I just burned to a crisp. I mean, on Sunday I went racing at King's Lynn, and last Sunday, and it was the dullest, drizzly kind of awful day that you could ever wish for. There was no proper rain, it was just drizzle in the air. It was really dull, it was a little bit nippy. You know, I was sort of sat there with a jumper on all day. I went home, and I kid you not, I was as bright red as a lobster. I'm like, how the hell do I manage to burn when there's no sunshine? That's how bad sort of it is. But anyway, so I was sort of riding around last night trying to cool off, because I've been sort of don't sleep that well in the summer months because of the heat, and like I say, my heart struggles, and sort of, just in general I struggle. And so I was sort of riding around, window open, sort of cruising around, looking at the combines working in the area. And the farm that the first farm that I worked on, that's the farm that Sunnyside Up Farm series is based on. And yeah, that farm, I found them combining, and the lad that drives the combine now is different to the bloke that I work with who used to drive the combine. I used to work with a bloke called John Butler, and he used to drive the combine, and absolute, sort of legend in my eyes. I grew up, sort of over the hedge watching the farm that I eventually went to work on, and watching him combining and ploughing and drilling, and in my eyes, him and sort of my uncle were like my two biggest heroes, because they were both doing the job that I wanted to do, and my uncle, because he worked for A.H. Worths, and did up until the very day that he died. He worked for them, and sort of every now and again I would get to go down and look at him on sort of massive machinery, whereas the farm that I worked on sort of probably I would say they had sort of like medium machinery, some sort of low end machinery, and then sort of like the combine and the tractor, the 7810 and stuff like that was sort of more medium machinery. It wasn't the biggest, but it was, it was sort of midway. And anyway, so yeah, I grew up watching him over the edge and all around the area, because all of their fields surrounded where I grew up. Every single field around where I grew up was like that farm's field, and so I used to watch them. And as I say, eventually in 2007, I got to work on the farm full time, and because he was the combine driver. And I always remember my very first day. It was August the 13th. It was quite a hot day, and I was in my little John Deere, little 6610, and I had a red Seagull trailer on the back, and he's in the field combining. We were I'm pretty certain we were combining spring barley. I'm fairly certain it was spring barley that we were combining. They'd started the wheat. It'd been a really hot summer, and so they was most of the way through the wheat. They had saved some for when I come, so that I could sort of try and get the hang of unloading, from the combine, on the move sort of thing. Because, like I say, up until that point, apart from the year before where I'd hired a tractor and plough and done some ploughing for them, I'd never worked on a farm, and I'd certainly never, tried to drive alongside a combine taking grain from it, And I always remember I was in the field, and he said to me, because he sort of got out, realised it was me, and he said to me, he goes, just sit here until you see the lights go on, and then just get yourself safely to the combine. You don't have to rush. So the lights come on at like 75%, so there's still a good way to go in the tank. You don't need to rush. You don't need to do anything silly. Just get yourself to the combine, pull up alongside, try as hard as you can, get the auger in the middle of the trailer, and just stop at that speed, and I'll load you. He said, like, I load the trailers on this farm. He said, because it's quite difficult for the it was Ray who was on the other tractor. He said it's really difficult for Ray to be able to load his trailer, because it was a silage trailer, and because it was really hard to see sort of where you was at. So he said, I just we decided as a farm, I load the trailers, you pull alongside, you put the auger in the middle of the trailer, you match my speed, and then I can go quicker or slower, and I can load the trailer. So I was like, right, okay, I got it. And the lights go on, and and I was really nervous that day. Like I say, it was my first sort of fall down the farm. My first job when I first got to work that morning was on the little Davy Brown 12. I can't remember the numbers of it, but it was a little two-wheel drive David Brown, and was it a 1210? I think. I can't remember now, but anyway, and yeah, I was on the David Brown, and I had the dyke mower on the back of it, and it was an orbital reach one. So it meant it could reach right down into the dikes on the back of a 2-wheel drive David Brown, right? And that was kind of like my sort of first ever job, and I did an awful job, so bad in fact that the boss who sort of hired me had to go back and redo all the places I'd been because I'd done such a terrible job. And at first I hated that job. That first year I really hated that job. I just like I couldn't stand. I just really did detest that job. And then as the years sort of started to pass on the farm, I grew to the point where it was my favourite job on the farm, one of my favourite jobs on the farm. You know, when in the mornings, when like, you know, there was sort of, you know, the combine, you know, John would have been blowing it down and making sure that, you know, all the straw was off it, so that every day we started with a straw-free combine, so that, you know, obviously we sort of tried to eliminate the risks of fire and that. And yeah, I remember I used to go into work, and I used to I used to go and put my bag straight away in the dike mowing tractor. Not that I needed to worry, because everybody else on the farm, like Ray, and well, Ray was the other person that worked with me, and occasionally we used to have a student come in if we just sort of needed a third person. But myself and Ray were usually able to cope with you know, with the farm and you know, the combine sort of thing. And yeah, he would want to go straight on to, like, you know, sort of cultivating or ploughing or something like that. So I'd you know, but I'd make sure by getting the dike tractor, and yeah, that's what I'd do. And I grew to love that job. In the end, we ended up putting on the 66 10 John Deere, just because it was a lot easier, and because my boss eventually sheared the rear axle off the David Brown, because of the reach on that mower was so far and the strain that it used to put that little David Brown under. You know, it really was not good for it. And I used to say to him, like, you know, is this tractor strong enough to take this? And he, yeah, we've been doing it for years. And as I say, I don't know whether it was the first year or the second year, or when it was, but I got a phone call from him saying, can you come and give us a hand, please? I'm in a little bit of bother here. And basically what had happened is the wheel on the side of the dike, the back wheel, the axle had just literally ripped the wheel clean off. And of course the tractor had gone over to the dike and sort of slipped down, but because the arm was that side as well, and he was trying, I don't know why, but he was trying to cut the bank on the other side of the dike, and because it kept the tractor propped up, it stopped the tractor from rolling down the dikes. Otherwise, you know, obviously that would have put him in peril. But yeah, so it sort of stopped the tractor from rolling. But anyway, I went and got him, and he was quite shook up, as you would expect. But yeah, sort of that was my first day. But anyway, so I'm now on the tractor and trailer, you see, and I'm driving down the field. The lights have come on. I've gone underneath the auger, and you know, I've got it in the middle. I'm great. And because I didn't want to steer into the combine, I just decided, stay at this speed, just keep looking forwards, and then every now and again just have a little glance back, but just look forwards, don't steer. Because I mean, you know, for those of you that drive a car, you know, you must have had it where you look, say, to the left hand side of the road, and then when you look back to the road, your car is going that way, it's going the way you were looking. And that was what I didn't want to happen. I didn't want the tractor to sort of be veering, you know, towards the combine header and the combine and that. And you know, so anyway, I'm sort of, you know, I'm laser focused down the field. You know, I'm riding alongside the combine. I then pluck up the courage to turn round and, you know, to make sure that we're still unloading. And I could just see the top of the combine over the back of the trailer. I'd literally set off. I'd literally set off down the bloody field, like, and we'd sort of spilt some grain because, like, John hadn't realised that, you know, I was sort of going hell for. I thought I'd matched the speed, you see, but I clearly hadn't. And yeah, and then eventually I sort of stopped, and he stopped just behind me, so it wasn't unloading. got out and said, like, for the next 2 or 3 loads, we're just going to stop and you're just going to unload, and I'm just going to load you stopped, he said, and then what I'll do is I'll try and teach you how to ride alongside a combine. And so the boss man went on the combine for probably about an hour or so, and I just was riding and practicing with John, and it was he that sort of taught me to sort of ride alongside the combine and be able to unload from it. And yeah, but it was a very funny story. But yeah, so I was out the other night, and I see the combine stopped, and the field that it was in, it brought back a really lovely moment. One of those moments in life when you're watching films and you think, "God, that never happens to me." That sort of moment between two characters, and I don't know. It's you think that only happens in the movies. It doesn't happen in real life. But I sort of sat on the end of the field, on the road, and sort of looking down, and the combine was in the field, and it was stopped at the far end. Funnily enough, it was stopped with its flashing lights going, so it was waiting for a tractor and trailer to turn up, and it was stopped in the same place that this memory that I had happened, and I never forget it. I don't know how long I'd been working there or whatever, I don't sort of know. Just this one year we were harvesting, we were in that field, we were harvesting wheat, and the boss man used to sort of finish work at like 8 o'clock in the evening, and then he used to say to me and John, just work till whenever, but make sure you lock everywhere up and switch everywhere off. That was basically the rules, sort of thing. And it was no problem. Anyway, we got to this point, and we were in this field, and he just stopped. We unloaded, and after we unloaded, he stopped and was waving his hands at me, and I thought he was in trouble or so. I thought something sort of was happening. So I've quickly stopped and sort of got out and ran round. It was about, I don't know, 12 in the evening, and I've sort of run round, and gone on the combine, and I said, "Are you all right?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, stop." He said, "Have you got any tea or anything left?" I said, "Well," I said, "I ain't got no tea left." I said, "But I've got my squash." "Why?" He said, "Well, have a minute, shall we?" So I said, "Yeah, okay." So he said, "Get out." So I got out, and I sort of assumed he wanted to sit on his own, and and have a minute on his own. I was thinking, like, this is a bit weird, I just want to get on, really. And what he did was he closed the lids on the combine, and he's like, "Come with me," and he closed the lids, and we climbed up the back and went and sat, and we got sat on the lids, and we just sat up there underneath the stars, and it was a really beautiful warm night, and we just talked, and it was really kind of one of those moments that will probably stay with me forever. We just talked about life, about stuff, about he sort of told me things about him that he'd never sort of told anyone else. I felt like that night it was just me and him, and he really opened up, and I think he knew in his heart of hearts that he could trust that so many years later I wouldn't be telling people on YouTube. I mean, I'm not, apart from the stuff I talked about, but I certainly wouldn't divulge the stuff that he was talking about. But it was really nice to kind of get to know him in that way. Do you know what I mean? Like, to really think that he was telling me things, what, really helped me to sort of get to know him better and understand him. Because the thing with John was, I liked him and I got on really well with him, but no one else did. And I could never understand why. And a few years later, myself and Emma were talking, and she said to me, she said, "How is it that me and you get on so well with John, but everybody else struggles?" Like, sort of Ray, Jim before him, and like other workers that had worked on a farm, and sort of what have you. And I mean, Anthony used to sort of say to me, like with John, I just take him or leave him. Like, I'll tell him what I want doing, and I just leave it, and if he does it, he does it. If he don't, he don't, which I could never get my head around, and I used to think, but I don't understand why everybody's like this, like, I get on fine with him, like, and many years later, Emma was like, why do you think it is? And I said, one of the biggest reasons, I said, I think that I got on okay with him on the farm. And she said, why? And I said, well, I always let him be right, because being right doesn't bother me. So if he, I kind of worked out quite quickly that he needs to kind of feel a little bit self-important. He likes to think and feel that he knows everything about the job, when it was clear sometimes he didn't know everything about the job. There were things that, he clearly didn't have a clue what he was talking about, but he had that sort of way where he would be convincing you that he did, even though he didn't, And then I said, like, I just let him be right. I just let him, I let him have his opinion, and I don't challenge it. I said, and it doesn't mean that he walks all over me. I said, on the contrary, I said, I think because of it, he kind of respects me a little bit more, because I think he sort of thinks to himself, well, Jamie's worked me out. And and I said, like, the other thing that I always do as well is, I said, it costs absolutely nothing to sit and listen to a person. I said, no, I sit and listen to him. I said, if he's giving me advice, if he's telling me how to do something or whatever, sit and listen. I said, it costs me nothing, and I don't have to do what he says. But give him the time. If he's in his mind, if he's taking that time out of that day to impart some wisdom, or give you a bit of advice, or show you how to do something. I mean, it was him that taught me how to drive a tractor as straight as now what I can drive a tractor. I mean, he couldn't drive a tractor straight for toffee, but he knew the technique. He knew it, but he said, for whatever reason, Jamie, I can't do it. He said, but this is what you do. And I did, and I listened to him, and I sort of did everything that he said, and I just practiced it, year after year after year after year. I just, religiously stuck to every word he said, and eventually I got it. And now, I don't know about now, but when I was working on a farm, I could get in any tractor and drive that in a straight line, and sort of go and plough a field. And I've said before, very often, even in my Challenger on the second farm, like where I had it for ploughing, there were many times when I didn't use it. I thought, I can drive myself up and down a field in a straight line, not pinpoint accurate like GPS can. I need to make that clear. I'm not, at the end of the day, if you want something to be pinpoint accurate, you use GPS. And even for myself, yes, I can drive a tractor in a straight line, but it's not, as I say, it's not GPS accurate. And if I needed to be accurate, i.e. if I was seed drilling, potato planting, or sort of anything, any job like that, I would be using GPS. There is no way I would be naive enough to think that I could drive that tractor in an absolute dead straight line all the way through the field, and then carry that on across the whole of the field in terms of potato planting. Because if you get one kink in it, you've messed up the whole field. And the thing was, the way the farm worked, we had to be dead precise with everything. Everything was the same width, so that all of the tractors drove in all of the same wheelings. I think the only thing that wasn't the same width as everything else was my plough, and it was only, I think it was about half a metre out. So it just meant that my wheelings were just slightly over from where they were. But the sort of farm, because of the benefits of ploughing, the farm sort of used to overlook that, and so it was never really an issue to them, But yeah, if I was out in the middle of nowhere, I would say to Adrian, do you mind if I plough freehand? And he'd be like, no, it's out of the way, you go for it. And but if it was near another farm, or near, he would say always, no GPS. I want it nice and straight. I want it to look proper. But if I was, out on the marsh somewhere, and there's not a house for like 10 miles, and there's not a road or a public road, within sort of 10 miles, he used to say, like, do what you like. I'm not bothered as long as you get it ploughed. And he used to just sort of say to him, can I freehand it? And he'd be like, yeah. But anyway, that night, I say we were sat up on that on those lids, and Yeah, it was a really special moment, and then I often say, I've said to him in the past, and I've said to Emma, the only way that that could have meant even more to me is if it had been Emma that I was sat up there with, because under the stars and like, and it was that kind of, it was one of those occasions where I think even two strangers could have opened up to each other. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, that's how I feel. That and I very often think about it because, like, I've said 1,000 times before. And don't get me wrong, I'm not bitter and I'm not mad. I made mistakes when I was younger, and I'm paying the price now. I don't have many friends in life. I don't really have too many people that, want to ring me up and talk to me and, whatever else. And, the sort of one or two people that do, they wait for me to invite them out, and, I have to pay for the whole time we're out. So, no one ever sort of ever rings me and says, oh, do you want to go out, or do you want to drink, or do you just want to meet up? Do you want to go for a walk, or what? Do you know what I mean? Like, and so it's, and I often think about that moment, and I think that moment, I've never felt so close to anybody in all my life. Like, as I say, it was a weird, really nice feeling. It's not, and there's going to be people that are going, oh, it wasn't a sexual thing, not at all. It's just two grown men sat up, under the stars, sort of in the night sky. It was nice and warm, and we just chatted. We just chatted about him and his wife, and his kids, and holidays, and me and Emma, and what our plans and hopes were for the future. You know what my plans were for. I mean, that night. I mean, remember him saying to me. He said, James, if you want to make it as a top tractor driver in this country, you've got to get away from this farm. He said, and I know you probably don't want to hear that, he said, but you've got to get, he said, because all your family worked here, and, there's a lot of history, and there's a lot of, sort of thing. He said, but you've got to get away from them because they're not good for you. They're holding you back. Um, and I didn't see it at the time. And at the time, if I'm honest, if I'd have been, I kind of felt like he was trying to get rid of me. That he didn't sort of want me there. Do you know what I mean? It was almost like, rather than taking it in the way that he meant it of, actually, you're really good and you should go work somewhere where you'd be appreciated, I felt like he was sort of saying, look, I don't want you here, and so therefore you should go and look for another job. And because I did, but a few years later, or whatever, sort of later, I began to see it. I began to see what he was talking about. And as I say, and then Adrian came and sat on the tractor that day after sitting at the end of the field, and sort of said the things that he said, and it got me thinking. And then and so in the end, I did end up jumping ship and moving to Adrian's farm, like, but well, it wasn't his farm; he was farm manager there, and yeah, and but as I say, that night will always stick in my mind for just kind of I think having the thing is, and I don't like banging up, I don't like going on about it, but somehow it seems to sort of come up, sort of every video, or sort of near enough every video. But it is a fact of my life, and I can't get away from it, and what have you. And I sort of don't talk about it or mention it as for sympathy or anything like that. Just mention it because it's fact, and that's it. And I'm just telling you, and that is all it is. And I think because I spent, when I was younger, so many months in hospital. Yes, my mum was down in London with me. I was in Great Ormond Street when I was a little kid, but I spent so many months, and obviously, mum was only allowed to sort of visit in visiting hours. Um, you know, so many months on my own, uh, and then sort of fast forward into my early teens when I was 11. And although I'm not going to go into it in this video, uh, something happened that was not nice. I will, at some point, I will probably talk about it, because I'm getting to that stage in life now. I'm 43, and I'm trying to let go of the stuff that have held me back all these years. And and Anna and Alan and Jasmine have kind of said to me, at some point you're going to have to talk about it. And I tried to talk about it with my ex. She wasn't really that interested. She didn't really want to know. She didn't really want to hear. I tried talking about it with Emma. She didn't want to know. She wasn't interested. She didn't really want to hear, because it is a horrible thing. But the only way that we're ever going to stop it from repeating is if we do talk about it. And it's not a nice thing to talk about, but we need to. And I think because of all of those things sort of in my early years, that night was the first night that I'd ever really felt properly close to someone where I could trust them, because I don't trust anyone. As I say, since what happened when I was 11, not quite 12, what happened in February, and I was 12 in the April, so it's like 2 months before my 12th birthday. And ever since that day when that thing started, I trusted someone, and felt a connection, and then they betrayed me in the way that they did. Like I say, I've never really trusted anyone since. And I think probably up until the point where Emma had her affair, I probably trusted Emma, because I don't know, Emma used to get me, and it was sort of kind of important to me that she did, and she did. But anyone else that I've ever really become friends with, or sort of been with, or whatever, it's in the pursuit of happiness. I've had many relationships, and I've not trusted a single one of them, and they've petered out quite quickly. But yeah, that night I felt a connection. I felt like there was someone that I was safe with, that I could trust, that I could talk to, that could talk to me, and we was sort of good. Do you know what I mean? Like, and as I say, that was really really important, and really, really grateful for it, as I say. And seeing the combine there that night, it brought it all back. Rather than it being a memory, it was a visual memory. It was a memory that was triggered by an actual vision of what happened near enough that night. And it was really good, really good, as I say. And I'm very grateful that that happened. And there was a few other times when myself and John, as I say, kind of had those sort of father-son moments, and it was really good. Like I say, no one sort of really ever liked him, but I just got on fine with him. The thing with John was you just had to take him for the way he was, and yeah, he says things, and yeah, sometimes he does say nasty things. I don't think he means it. I think part of it's his way. I think another part of it is that he has a really dry sense of humour, that it kind of leaves you with, is he winding me up, or am I going to smack him in the mouth? Whereas for me, I try and see the funny side of everything. And when he used to say things to me that used to hurt a little bit, I used to laugh at him. I just used to laugh at him, and what have you, and that. But I would leave it at that, And as I say, like it's like sort of the boss and his dad sort of came to me not long after I started work there, and they sort of said to me, we don't know what it is that you've got that no one else had, but John seems happier since you've come. And I said, well, I said, John's all right. And they're like, really? And I was like, yeah, John's fine. I said, like, I get on well with him. Like, I said, he's an absolute fountain of information and knowledge and, experience. I said, like, and I'd be stupid not to, tap into his brain and ask. At first he was reluctant. At first he didn't want to tell me anything. But, as the weeks and the months passed and what have you, and using a little bit of psychology on him. So kind of sort of as I was sort of figuring him out, he didn't like it when you didn't do things his way. So if I needed to know something, rather than just go up and ask him, and he would probably not tell me, I used to do something wrong that would relate to what I wanted to know, so that he would get angry. But in his anger, he would be telling me what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's that. That was literally how I worked him, and it was fine. There was no issues for me whatsoever. And that's what you got to do with people. I sort of listen to people about sort of Brian Clough and Alex Ferguson and what have you. And for those of you that are not English or from England, they're football managers or soccer managers, I guess, as you would probably know it as over the pond. And like sort of Alex Ferguson, Brian Clough, Martin O'Neill. It was said a lot about him that he was a man manager, and he managed, rather than managing a team, he managed 26 individuals, and he treated every single one of them differently, but to how they needed to be treated and how he sort of kind of thought they needed to be treated. And that's all I did with John, and that's all I do with anyone. I figure you out, and then I sort of think, right, okay, that's what I need to do to get the best out of you, and for me to get where I want to be. At the end of the day, we're all trying to get somewhere. We're all trying to be the best version of ourselves, or we should be trying to be the best versions of ourselves. And my uncle Stephen, who, as I say, worked at AH Worths, he won many sort of tractor awards and sort of spraying awards, ploughing awards, and I wanted to emulate him. I wanted to be every bit as good as what he was. He was my again, really more of a reference for people living in England, but he was my sort of Steve Davis or my Jimmy White or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And I really looked up to him, and I really wanted to be just like him. But I wanted to be better. That was the thing. I wanted to be like him. I looked up to him. I wanted to be like him. But then ultimately, as Stephen Hendry used to say, I wanted to be better, and that's how it was for me. I wanted to be the best tractor driver there was in this country. Now, as it was, things didn't work out. Sort of my heart condition got worse, and sort of working on the new farm that I was working on, really the time on that farm got cut short, sort of quite quickly. I think I was there about 3 years. I was there about 3 years roughly. And at that point things were just starting to pick up for me, starting to get, sort of, so I was doing most of the drilling, most of the potato planting. I was driving one of the 3 combines that we had. Sort of my life was starting to really, my farming career was really starting to go places. And as I say, my heart went within 2 years. Emma went. Within another 2 years I was broke and, sort of destitute really. My mum took me back in and what have you, and I sort of got myself back up and running again, and, really grateful for it. But, so anyway, I have gone on for way too long. If there is anyone still awake, if there is anyone still listening, then this probably would be a very good place to end the episode. I've almost nearly got this field ploughed. I've just got the headlands to do now, and so I can do them bits off camera because I'm only going to take sort of 10 minutes or whatever, but I don't want the video to go on for over an hour. So as I say, if there is anyone still listening and watching and what have you, thanks ever so much. I really do appreciate the fact that you take time out of your day to hear me talking and hear me recounting things in my life, and I really appreciate it. And if you haven't done already, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. It really does help. And all that's left for me to say is thanks ever so much for joining me on this episode. I've really enjoyed having your company, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next one. Bye for now.